Okay, perfect. Dennis, thank you so much for this time with you. Dennis, the ESG reporting lead for Carbery Group. You'll correct me if I'm wrong, but 1,200 farms from West Cork in Ireland, composed by four different cooperatives. Definitely one of the largest groups in Ireland with a very high quality produce, but always taking care of their farmers and reflected in the values of the company, but also how they are thinking and taking actions to protect the resilience of the farmers. Dennis, thank you so much for doing this once again. I can imagine your line of work and what you do in the day to day, and it has to be a bit chaotic, right? Like so many different protocols coming, so many different KPIs, and so much stuff to be monitoring and to be reporting. Thinking about the sustainability you guys have in Carbery, which are very ambitious, proper goal being set by 2035 and acting upon on those. How are you making sure from a reporting perspective that you are gathering the information that you require for satisfying the different protocols and regulations that are coming in?
Yeah,
Jumping straight into it.
no, nice one. Thanks, Ali. No, thanks for having me. So yeah, I suppose look, Carbery Group, we have an ambition to be net zero across all our operational facilities by 2035. So I suppose how are we achieving that? First of all, it's about properly monitoring the performance of each individual site in terms of energy. So obviously each site uses so much energy in natural gas, electricity, etc. So what we do is that we procure all of the data from each individual sites. Each site owns their data and they report the energy, water and wastes as well up to myself and in the Buckley, the Director of Sustainability. And subsequently we split that into Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. The group is aligned with the SBTI targets, so the Science-Based Target Initiative. So we have an annual emission reductions coming from our 2020 baseline. So depending on the size of the site in terms of production output and absolute emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2, we have a proportionate target. So each site has an individual target, which all consolidates up into the group's overall emissions reductions target. So I suppose absolute emissions reductions is key, so monitoring the energy performance, but another very key metric for us is our intensity metrics. So we monitor the output and how much energy we use per output and how much tons of CO2 equivalent we emit per ton of output that we produce. So combining these two metrics and kind of looking over it over historically and looking at trends, we are able to kind of determine which sites are the most efficient and which sites need kind of more work in terms of energy efficiency. And subsequently then that gets the conversations going around decarbonisation projects. So this says, okay, such a site has produced X amount of emissions over the last couple of years. You know, Scope 2 is actually quite large here in terms of electricity procurement. Can we consider solar, potentially PV, to offset that electricity, subsequently reducing our emissions, but also becoming more sustainable and self-sufficient, you know, in terms of our energy. So that kind of, I suppose, is how we kind of track our metrics and prioritize, you know, kind of progress, we'll say, in terms of our decarbonisation, in terms of Scope 1 and Scope 2.
Makes sense. And I guess over there is a balance of understanding the best value for money, right? And where to invest so that those decarbonization plans at the end are technically but economically feasible as well. And they're touching on your Scope 1 and your Scope 2, which is definitely challenging, but compared to Scope 3 seems a bit more straightforward, and you guys are under control, right? Scope 3, how do you guys go about it? How do you determine what are the opportunities for decarbonizing, which are the low-hanging fruits, and that engagement with the suppliers and overall with your chain?
Yeah, so Scope 3 obviously is difficult because a lot of that is outside of our operational control, but we do have certain influence within the supply chain. Obviously the largest being the West Cork area with the 4 cooperatives. You know, the suppliers are on our doorstep. So, you know, Carbery does a lot of work with the cooperatives and with the suppliers in targeting Scope 3 emissions. So I suppose in terms of low-hanging fruits, as you know, years ago we introduced a future-proof sustainability bonus where suppliers are paid an additional amount for achieving sustainability targets. Each of these measures there's only 4 measures, 5 now this year with liming, but these measures were put in place because they're easily monitored in terms of metrics, but also because we can actually monitor the changes in terms of our emissions profile. So for example, protected urea has been in place since 2023, and our suppliers are incentivized to purchase urea. From there, and working with you guys at ODOS Tech, we perform LCAs. So for every ton of urea that's spread compared to your common nitrogen or CAN, we're able to determine how much emissions that we've saved or have been reduced in terms of our fertilizer output. So that's just one example. So that's kind of the low-hanging fruit, and I guess developing on that is, you know, and just for context, I suppose our farm emissions, our scope 3 emissions, over 70% of it comes from the West Cork area, and that's at a Carbery Group level. So obviously you have to target the largest proportion first before you get into the other key subcategories. So I suppose to help us along here, and this was kind of the brainchild of Enda Buckley, Director of Sustainability, you know, he was thinking, how can we future-proof the dairy industry in Ireland? And that kind of gave birth to the Farm Zero C project. So the Farm Zero C project aims to be the first climate neutral kind of large commercial dairy farm globally. So out of that project, which Alejandro yourself worked on, there's certain work streams or work packages in place to determine what are the best and most effective methods to reduce emissions, improve water quality, improve soil health, that farmers can implement into their farming practices, which will achieve, to a point, net zero farms or now climate neutral farms. Those actions then, if they're financially feasible for suppliers, are added into the sustainability bonus future-proof, rolled out across West Cork. So I suppose that's, how we could prioritize, you know, in terms of biggest areas is obviously our farm level emissions, and then in terms of actions, they're kind of birthing out of Farm Zero C and rolled out through future-proof. So that's how we kind of prioritize and get and ensure. And I suppose we kind of have to a degree a certain control there, Ali, as in, you know, because the future-proof bonus is owned by Carbery and the 4 West Cork co-ops, you know, we're able to track those metrics and actually see the impact and determine, you know, emissions reductions or improvement in soil health arising out of that. Whereas a lot of the other scope 3 subcategories, be it transportation or downstream processing, to a degree it's outside our control. So, you know, we can only change what we have you know, a proper influence over.
Yes, and I guess that is one of the perks of being a cooperative system, right? You would have the data, but also all of the closer engagement with the farmers. And I always mention to other dairy groups the success that has been future-proof. I think that an incorrect prejudice is that the farmers are not willing to change or to implement mitigation strategies. Correct me if I'm wrong, but during the first year of future-proof, more than 80% of the farmers started giving protected urea, making that switch and getting access to the bonus and getting access to the sustainability incentive, right? So exactly. The thinking that the farmer is not willing to change is there if there is no support. But if there's support, if there's a cooperative, if there's a mechanism, and if there's a sustainability incentive, they are willing to do it. And 80% during the first year is a huge amount. So, Denis, like you guys have been under SBTI for a while, reporting on these efforts of Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3, and getting the recognition that you guys deserve out of this. Now, there's a lot of dairy groups that are looking into SBTI, and they get the shakes because they do not know how to start or how to go about it. How do you make sure that all of the efforts that you are performing, the future-proof, the solar panels, all of this is packaged in a way that will be recognized for your SBTI goals?
Good question. So I suppose, look, first of all, pre-SBTI, Carbery has been always kind of tracking our performance in terms of emissions. Okay, so we've always been looking to the future and how can we future-proof the business. So that's kind of the priority number one. aligning with SBTI was probably the right thing to do because, you know, it's the best standard out there in terms of setting proper decarbonisation targets. So as of 2020 is our baseline, and as of that, Carbery has been tracking against SBTI, and we're in the middle of submission of our data, etc., into SBTI for validation. So I suppose in terms of, sorry, Ali, what was the second half of that question?
I guess from a reporting perspective, how do you make sure that the practices that you're performing and the data that you can collect from these practices can be filed and can be recognized from an SBTI perspective?
So we align with the GHG protocol in terms of, we'll say, a reporting standard. That's across our Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3 emissions. Why? Because I suppose it's the most recognized standard out there in terms of GHG accounting. So that's how I suppose we collect our data. In terms of, I suppose, systemization and automation of that, there's been a lot of work done internally to actually get the proper processes and controls in place to consolidate our emissions data and our water data and our waste data, all our sustainability data, truth be told. And what we've done is we've kind of implemented kind of automated workflows to ensure that the data is consolidated into centralized enterprise data warehouses. Scope 3 then is a lot more difficult because a lot of the data is outside of our control or across our value chain. So that's when we started working with yourself and Cian and Sophie to actually create a solution which could properly monitor and track our Scope 3 emissions, which we'll say is against the GHG protocol standard and also meets our regulatory requirements, be it CSRD and others that you know customers may require of us. So I suppose the standard is good, obviously GHG protocol, but what I will say is that we got a lot of assistance from ODOS Tech in actually setting it up initially first day. So you guys brought a lot of expertise and experience to the table through Cian and Sophie and yourself to actually determine what are the data requirements needed for the Scope 3 Category 1 to Category 15, and then how can we disseminate that data across our value chain to meet the actual regulatory requirements. So that process was put in place last year. We're building on it again this year, and the idea is that once Carbery reports under CSRD, which is from 2027 being our first reporting year, is that we can get Scope 3 down to a quarterly basis or even a monthly basis, depending on how quick we can get the data. But the process is now in place in terms of automation and data collection. Now, what I will say about that is data integrity has been an issue, but we are working on it. Like, I'll give you an example. There was once we completed the Scope 3 emissions and we're reviewing, and we're like, geez, there was one particular site which in terms of Carbery's overall size would be relatively small, but they had a purchase good and service in there that was in the top 10 in terms of emissions output. But once we got into the actual data, we discovered that it was actually the conversion factor for the currency was off. So like, it's those little things that you learn, you know, as you're going through. But working with you guys now, we've kind of set a nice standard against the GHG protocol to be able to collect, process and get this data reported efficiently.
Thanks for the shout out, Denis, and yeah, well, we have seen it firsthand. Many different sites, and the normal thing is like you guys have tens of thousands of purchases of goods and services, which is the normal for every dairy group. So definitely some challenges over there. But yeah, the data setup is key for making more efficiency. Monthly reports will be challenging. For sure.
But that's the ambition. Like, you know, I suppose when we started out, it was just getting it over the line for a year was tough. But now we're like, okay, we have a process in place to collect our sustainability data from each site. How can we bake in the Scope 3 data? Purchase goods now being quite an easy one, because in terms of our centralized enterprise data warehouse, a lot of that information across the globe is readily available. So how about we bake that in, and then bit by bit just keep building up, you know, the data requirements using existing systems internally, and obviously then setting up kind of a workflow that this data can travel over to ODOS Tech's platform, determine our Scope 3 footprint, and then from there we can start building that up. So monthly is ideally where we want to be. You know, if we want to, I suppose this is the sustainability in data in general. you know, it's kind of seen as secondary sometimes to financial data, but we want to get the sustainability first and foremost with our financial data, i.e. on a monthly basis. Sustainability data is crucial for Carbery Group, and that's well recognized within the group, but I suppose it's getting the data from a kind of a quarterly process into a monthly process is the key, you know, and getting it there first and foremost in front of, we'll say, important eyes.
Yeah. Yeah, well, and then we would be talking about sustainability plans not being done once a year, right? But could give you enough data and kind of a cliche phrase, but you can't really reduce what you are not measuring. So if you are
Exactly.
measuring every month, we'll be able to see those. Dennis, talking about SBTI, of course, but then we move into CSRD. Um, CSRD, of course, being European Union. You guys are operating all around the globe in a few different sites. How do you manage the localized regulations and the expectations that you would have from other places, for example, in the US or in another places, that cross-border reporting demands? Are you seeing it in other places kind of close to the CSRD or even 10% of the CSRD? How are you monitoring this?
Truth be told, I suppose in different jurisdictions outside the EU, there isn't as much demand for sustainability data in terms of regulatory. Obviously, customers would require it in terms of questionnaires, and we have other kind of standards, be it EcoVadis, which there'll be a tiny bit of, we'll say, emissions data, water data, waste data. But truth be told, the European Union is the real driver of regulatory requirements. And as we are headquartered here in Ballineen in West Cork, the full group will come into scope for CSRD. So I suppose some sites it can be difficult to get the data because, you know, in their own jurisdictions it's not seen as important, and, you know, they mightn't put it high on the priority. But, you know, emissions and water and waste are part of our key KPIs, which are reported at a global leadership team level. So, you know, the guys understand the importance of collecting this data and reporting it to myself and Enda Buckley. So in terms of, we'll say, regulatory requirements, it's not too bad in other jurisdictions. It's not. It's the European Union is kind of the main driver through CSRD at the moment. But look, we would have been capturing and reporting this data anyway, Ali. You know, the whole reason for us is, you know, future-proofing the business, ensuring that, you know, we're not overusing the resources that we need to produce our products, and that, you know, finding efficiencies and cost savings where we can. That's, you know, that's why we're here in terms of sustainability. Look, CSRD is important. Yeah. It's a good standard to measure against and benchmark against your peers and competitors in out there. But truth be told, we would have been doing it anyway. And the same goes for Scope 3. We have captured Scope 3 historically. You know, no one told us to do it, but we just know it's the right thing to do.
Yeah, well, and that shows a lot how proficient you guys are into this, and how proactive you are on it. Not just doing it because of the potential demands. Because CSRD, well, we have to see when it is going to be implemented. If it is like EUDR, it will keep getting postponed. But also, is the right thing to do, right, from an ESG perspective as well. Biggest challenges coming down the line, Dennis. Of course, CSRD being one of those, but also data collection. What is the challenge nowadays, and potential solutions for achieving your climate goals?
I think I touched on it slightly earlier, but historically an issue has been data integrity. So yeah, can we stand by the data, you know, that we actually are collecting? So there's a lot of kind of, we'll say, initially it was kind of difficult to track some of the emissions because a lot of the information was in different units of measurements. So first of all, it's about standardizing units of measurements, and kind of we've noticed that, we'll say, certain data, you know, the unit of measurement was assumed to be, we'll say, for example, kilowatts, and it actually wasn't, you know. So we've had a lot of kind of, we'll say, minor issues there initially in I suppose collecting data. We've that now ironed out, but the business is also growing, you know, as we need to, you know, we need to grow to ensure that, you know, we continue to pay leading milk price to our shareholders here in West Cork. So I suppose with that comes a lot more complexity, you know, our systems become larger, our business
Yeah.
models become bigger. So there's a lot more data to start collecting. So look, we work closely here in Carbery with the IT team in terms of, you know, centralizing our data, having one enterprise data warehouse and ensuring that the data filters into it. And then from there that we're able to disseminate our data, you know, perform our calculations, be it emissions calculations, and report that correctly. So look, there's an awful lot of work ongoing, but in terms of, I suppose, that is the difficulty, is we're a growing business, we have to continue to grow, but how do we, you know, ensure that the data continues to flow into, you know, our processes and keep going reporting. So data integrity, I suppose, is probably the first one, you know, because you need to proof the data, ensure it's correct, and then build it into your data flows and automations.
Yeah, absolutely. A good traceability, and as you're mentioning, the data is there, is working closely with the IT team so that the system and infrastructure can be deployed, and that is resilient and scalable anyway. Dennis, with that, we let you go. Thanks so much for the time. Pleasure, big fan, super big fan of what
Uh,
you guys do, and it's
I
a
know.
deep pleasure to be involved with you guys. Already 5 or 6 years working with
Yeah,
Carbery, so
no,
it's,
it's
it's great for
fantastic.
us.
No, in fairness, like, you know, since I've been at Carbery, and you know, you guys have always, you've been there basically, you know, since I've been here at Carbery. You know, we've worked great relationship with ODOS Tech, and look, we have a lot of plans for the future with you guys, be it building on our scope 3 emissions, looking at potential future product LCAs that we built on from a couple of years ago, and kind of getting that on a more regular basis. So look, Ali, it's always a pleasure. You know, you're always welcome down here in West Cork. So no, thanks very much for having me, in fairness.
Thank you so much, Dennis. All right, Dennis, with that.